The depth of Damien Keown's work in applying Buddhist ethics to modern bioethics is so rich and fascinating, it's hard not to get swept away by it. Can you imagine a scholar in the 20th and 21st centuries reaching back to ancient teachings from over 2,500 years ago and finding fresh insights that apply to today's most complex moral dilemmas? It's truly remarkable, especially considering how difficult these issues, like euthanasia, abortion, genetic engineering, and more, are to navigate even within the frameworks of Western ethics, let alone through the lens of an ancient spiritual tradition. So let's dive deep and really unpack this. Be prepared, because it's going to be a long and compelling journey into the heart of Buddhist ethics and bioethics. Damien Keown, a trailblazer in Buddhist bioethics. First off, we can't talk about Buddhist ethics and bioethics without first understanding just who Damien Keown is. Born in 1951, Keown began his journey in the world of academia with a PhD in Buddhist studies from the University of London, and since then, his career has been absolutely pivotal in shaping how Buddhist ethics is perceived in modern-day ethical conversations. What makes Keown's work stand out is his unique ability to bridge the ancient with the contemporary, particularly in the fields of medicine and biotechnology. Isn't it incredible to think that Buddhist ethics, which originated so long ago, could still be relevant today? And not just relevant, but actually providing new, valuable perspectives on issues that many would consider modern problems. It really highlights the timelessness of Buddhist moral teachings, doesn't it? One of Keown's most significant contributions is his book Buddhism and Bioethics, 1995. Imagine, at that time, this was one of the first comprehensive attempts to systematically apply Buddhist principles to some of the biggest debates in bioethics, like abortion, euthanasia, organ transplantation, and even genetic engineering. Through his pioneering efforts, he didn't just create a niche, he made Buddhist perspective central to ethical discussions happening across the globe. This is important because, as our world becomes increasingly interconnected, we need ethical systems that don't just reflect one cultural or philosophical viewpoint. Keown's work offers just that, a fresh, compassionate perspective grounded in centuries-old wisdom, the foundations of Buddhist ethics. But before we dive into Keown's specific contributions, we really need to understand the foundation of Buddhist ethics itself. Where does all of this moral philosophy come from? At the heart of Buddhist ethics are the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and they're fundamentally concerned with the alleviation of suffering. How beautiful is that? At its core, Buddhism is about compassion, wisdom, and finding ways to reduce suffering in the world, whether it's on a personal level or a societal one. And that's why it translates so well into modern ethical debates. The Panchasila, the 5 precepts of moral conduct. Let's start with the Panchasila, the 5 precepts. These are considered the most basic ethical guidelines for all Buddhists, kind of like a moral compass. They're simple, yet profound: to refrain from taking life, non-harming, to refrain from taking what is not given, non-stealing, to refrain from sexual misconduct, to refrain from false speech, to refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. These precepts aren't commandments like you'd find in some other religious traditions. Instead, Keown emphasizes that they're guidelines, encouraging personal growth rather than just rigid obedience. I find that distinction so powerful. It means that ethics in Buddhism is seen more as a personal journey of development, fostering moral conduct, sila, that helps individuals reduce suffering and move closer to enlightenment. Think about it, this flexible, compassionate approach is such a refreshing change from more rigid moral systems. It allows room for individuals to reflect deeply on their actions and intentions, rather than simply following rules. Doesn't that make ethics feel more personal, more meaningful? The principle of ahimsa, non-harming. One of the most beautiful aspects of Buddhist ethics is the principle of ahimsa, or non-harming. This principle is so central to Buddhist teachings. And Keown emphasizes its importance not just in refraining from physical violence, but in cultivating a broad commitment to not causing harm in any way, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, to any sentient being. Ahimsa becomes especially crucial in bioethical debates, like those surrounding abortion, euthanasia, or organ transplantation. How do we navigate these difficult decisions while adhering to the principle of non-harming? It's not easy, but Keown argues that Buddhism's emphasis on intention provides a critical layer of understanding. It's not just about whether harm occurs, but about the intention behind the action. Is it rooted in compassion or something else? That's such an important distinction to make. Karma and intention in ethical decision-making. Speaking of intention, this is where Buddhist ethics really gets interesting. In many Western ethical systems, actions are judged primarily by their outcomes, whether they lead to good or bad results. But in Buddhism, intention, satana, plays a much larger role in determining the morality of an action. Isn't that fascinating? Think about it. Even if an action results in unintended harm, it may not be considered unethical if the intention behind it was pure and compassionate. This is such a profound shift in thinking. For example, if a doctor makes a medical decision that ultimately leads to a patient's death, that might be seen as unethical in some frameworks. But from a Buddhist perspective, if the doctor's intention was to alleviate suffering, they may not be held morally responsible in the same way. This focus on intention really humanizes ethics, doesn't it? It acknowledges the complexities of real-life decision-making, where sometimes there are no perfect outcomes. Buddhist ethics as virtue ethics. Now here's where Keown's work gets particularly interesting. One of his major theoretical contributions is his argument that Buddhist ethics aligns closely with the framework of virtue ethics, especially when compared to Aristotelian ethics. That's a pretty bold claim, right? But let's break it down. Virtue ethics, unlike deontological or utilitarian systems, doesn't focus so much on rules or consequences. Instead, it's about developing moral character. In Aristotle's ethics, the goal is to cultivate virtues like courage, wisdom, and temperance. Keown argues that Buddhist ethics functions in a similar way. It's about cultivating wholesome mental states, kusala citta, and developing virtues like compassion, generosity, and mindfulness. The ultimate goal, of course, is enlightenment, but along the way, you're constantly working on becoming a more virtuous person. This is such a powerful framework because it allows Buddhist ethics to be more adaptable. When faced with complex ethical dilemmas, like those found in bioethics, it doesn't just give you a set of rules to follow. Instead, it encourages you to cultivate the virtues that will help you make compassionate, wise decisions in context. Isn't that just so relevant for today's world? Especially in bioethics, where there are often no easy answers, this virtue-based approach can provide the flexibility and nuance needed to address these tough questions. Applying Buddhist ethics to modern bioethics. Now that we've laid the foundation, let's dive into how Keown applies these ancient ethical principles to the cutting-edge field of bioethics. This is where things really get exciting. Imagine navigating issues like abortion, euthanasia, organ transplantation, and genetic engineering, topics that challenge even the most seasoned ethicists, from a Buddhist perspective. How do these timeless teachings on compassion and non-harming fit into the high-stakes world of modern medicine? Abortion, a complex ethical dilemma. One of the most controversial and emotionally charged issues in bioethics is abortion. Keown's work on this topic is particularly insightful, as he brings Buddhist perspectives into the conversation in a way that's both compassionate and deeply thoughtful. In Buddhist cosmology, life is understood as a continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara. According to this worldview, life begins at conception, and the fetus is considered a sentient being from that moment because it is imbued with consciousness, vijnana. Given this understanding, abortion is generally seen as the taking of life, which is prohibited under the first precept of non-harming. But here's where it gets interesting. Keown doesn't argue that Buddhist ethics is absolutist. In fact, he points out that while the taking of life is considered a grave moral transgression, Buddhist ethics also emphasizes compassion and context-sensitive decision-making. Isn't that a refreshing perspective? Instead of condemning abortion outright, Buddhist ethics encourages us to weigh the specific circumstances and the suffering involved. For example, If continuing a pregnancy would result in severe harm to the mother or child, Buddhist ethics might allow for some moral flexibility. What do you think about this approach? It's so different from the rigid, one-size-fits-all frameworks we often see in discussions about abortion, isn't it? It allows for a more compassionate, nuanced understanding of the issue, one that takes into account both the sanctity of life and the need to alleviate suffering. Euthanasia and end-of-life care. Next up is the topic of euthanasia, which is another major area of debate in bioethics. Keown's work on this topic is incredibly nuanced, as he explores how Buddhist teachings on death and dying can inform our approach to end-of-life care. In Buddhist thought, death is not seen as the end of existence, but rather as a transition to the next stage of the samsaric cycle. The state of mind at the moment of death is considered critically important because it influences the nature of one's rebirth. As a result, euthanasia presents significant ethical challenges from a Buddhist perspective. Actively ending a life, even to relieve suffering, may disrupt the natural karmic process and lead to negative consequences for both the individual and those involved in the act. Keown argues that while active euthanasia, where a person's life is intentionally ended, is generally incompatible with Buddhist ethics, passive euthanasia, the decision to withhold life-sustaining treatment, may be ethically permissible in some cases. What a compassionate distinction to make! Instead of prolonging suffering unnecessarily, passive euthanasia allows for a more natural process of death, in line with Buddhist teachings on impermanence and non-harming. Can you imagine the weight of these decisions for those involved? Keown's approach offers a way to navigate these incredibly difficult choices with both compassion and ethical sensitivity. Organ donation, the gift of life. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about organ donation, another area where Keown's insights are particularly enlightening. Organ transplantation raises complex ethical questions, especially from a Buddhist perspective, where the principle of non-harming and the sanctity of life are key considerations. Keown emphasizes the Buddhist virtue of dana, or generosity, as a guiding principle in the ethics of organ donation. Donating one's organs to save the lives of others can be seen as a selfless act of compassion, aligning beautifully with Buddhist teachings on non-attachment and altruism. How incredible is that? But of course, there are also important ethical considerations to keep in mind. Keown points out that the donor's death must be natural, and no harm should come to them during the process of organ retrieval. This raises some tricky questions, particularly around the issue of brain death. Is brain death truly the end of life, or is it simply a medical definition that doesn't fully align with Buddhist understandings of death and rebirth? These are deep, complex questions that require careful thought and consideration. Keown's approach to organ donation is a perfect example of how Buddhist ethics can be applied in a modern context without losing its core values of compassion and non-harming. Isn't it amazing how these ancient teachings can still provide guidance on such contemporary issues? Genetic engineering, playing with nature. Now, this is where things get really interesting: genetic engineering and biotechnology. Can you imagine what the Buddha might say about altering human DNA to prevent diseases or enhance physical traits? It's such a mind-boggling question. Keown doesn't shy away from tackling these thorny issues. He explains that Buddhist ethics encourages humility in the face of nature and cautions against the desire to control or manipulate natural processes for personal gain. The Buddhist concept of anicca, impermanence, teaches that all things are subject to change and decay, and attempts to achieve perfection through genetic modification may be at odds with this fundamental understanding of the world. However, Keown doesn't argue that genetic engineering is inherently wrong. Instead, he emphasizes the importance of using these technologies in ways that reduce suffering and promote well-being. Isn't that such a balanced approach? Rather than rejecting scientific progress outright, Buddhist ethics calls for careful ethical reflection on the potential consequences, both positive and negative, of genetic manipulation. It's a reminder that just because we can do something, doesn't mean we necessarily should. What a thought-provoking perspective. Assisted reproductive technologies, new life, new questions, and then there's the issue of assisted reproductive technologies, art, like in vitro fertilization, IVF, and surrogacy. These technologies have revolutionized the way we think about procreation, but they also raise complex ethical questions, especially from a Buddhist perspective. In Buddhist thought, procreation is often seen as part of the cycle of samsara, and the desire to have children can be viewed as an attachment that perpetuates suffering. However, Keown explains that the decision to use art must be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. The intentions of the individuals involved, as well as the potential consequences for the child, parents, and society, all need to be taken into account. One of the most ethically challenging aspects of art is the commodification of human life, particularly in cases of surrogacy. Keown calls for a compassionate and thoughtful approach, one that respects the dignity of all individuals involved and minimizes harm. Isn't that such a sensitive, humane way to think about these issues? Stem cell research, science meets ethics. Finally, let's talk about stem cell research, a field that holds incredible promise for medical advancements, but also raises profound ethical questions, particularly around the use of human embryos. In Buddhist ethics, life is believed to begin at conception, which means that human embryos are considered sentient beings with moral value. As such, the use of embryos in stem cell research could be seen as a form of taking life, which is prohibited under the first precept of non-harming. Keown acknowledges the potential medical benefits of stem cell research, but he cautions against using human embryos in ways that violate the principle of non-harming. He argues that while scientific progress is important, it must be balanced with respect for life and a commitment to reducing suffering. Isn't that such a powerful reminder that even in the pursuit of knowledge, we must remain grounded in our ethical principles? Conclusion: a compassionate ethical framework for the modern world. As we've explored in depth, Damien Keown's contributions to Buddhist ethics and bioethics are nothing short of groundbreaking. He has shown us that Buddhist teachings offer a rich, nuanced framework for addressing some of the most complex ethical issues of our time. Whether it's abortion, euthanasia, genetic engineering, or organ transplantation, Keown's work reminds us that compassion, non-harming, and intention should always guide our moral decision-making. What's truly remarkable about Keown's work is how it bridges the ancient and the modern, the spiritual and the scientific. In a world that often feels divided, his approach offers a path forward, one that is thoughtful, compassionate, and deeply humane. Isn't it incredible to think that teachings from over 2,500 years ago can still provide such profound insights into today's most pressing ethical questions? So, what do you think? Doesn't Keown's work make you want to explore these topics even further? It's such a rich and fascinating area of study. And it's clear that Buddhist ethics has so much to offer the world of bioethics, and beyond.